It's emergency power all the time here on the What Car.
Yeah.
I thought we were just going to do like one-off episode that we did during the holidays on power stations, like the
Mm-hmm.
little bricks, the LFP things. Go back and listen to it. What is it? Episode
6,
202, 6, 4.
5, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
One of those, we talk about power stations. Since then, we kicked that one off an episode or two early with you having a power outage during the podcast. Then we talked about the power stations. Then we followed it up with me having a power outage between podcasts. And now I've got more news that something I stumbled across. It's actually pretty darn cool. I'm Phil Royle. I'm about to bring you this news that maybe everybody knows about it, but I just showed up in my feed. So there you go. Did I already say my name? Yes. And I've been here doing automotive and content creation and journalism for 20 something years. But for the last 5 years now, I've been on the Walk Car and we have been selling t-shirts to help support the blog and the podcast. So go to thewalkcar.com/store and you can purchase paraphernalia that helps support the podcast and blog, like I said. And if you want to see what any of it looks like on people, go to youtube.com/@thewalkcar and you'll find Ed wearing a hat and me wearing a shirt. I
Yep.
mean, I usually wear shirts, but this one says the Walk Car on it.
Ed Sanchez, likewise, 20 plus years in automotive content creation and moderation. Current day job, automotive electronics industry analyst, and the Watt Car co-founder and contributor.
Vorta Power.
This is a new one.
Never heard of it before until it showed up. It's Kickstarter. The Vorta
Mm-hmm.
Power VP20. Don't know much about it, other than it's a little brick that you
Mm-hmm.
plug in. It's like a suitcase, I guess. A small suitcase,
Mm-hmm.
a briefcase size thing. And it's got a cord you can get NACS or a CCS2, so I guess for Europe.
For Europe, yeah.
And it plugs into your Tesla. And then the output, oh, man, I didn't look at what the output.
3,500 watts, I think.
It's is that what I put? I can't remember what the plug outputs are, but it lets you export power from your Tesla.
Mm-hmm.
It somehow does a communication thing and then lets you output 3,500 watts of power, presumably tapping into the whole thing. I'm
Mm-hmm.
hoping there's an app and you can set it to like, I don't want to discharge beyond 30% or whatever of my
Mm-hmm.
state of charge. And I'm hoping all of that. This thing
Mm-hmm.
doesn't exist right now,
Mm-hmm.
but they had a goal of $10,000.
Mm-hmm.
And so far, as of this recording, people have pledged $154,000.
Wow.
And it's not a bad deal. Now, the price is it's a little steep.
MSRP is.
Yes, $1,700 for this thing, which actually, give or take, that's not probably that bad when you consider the price of like the Anchor C3800 or whatever it was. Some of these others that will cost you
2,000
$1,500,
plus, yeah.
$2,000, $2,500. This lets you tap into your car. So it's not,
Mm-hmm.
it's giving you access to a huge battery. You can't buy a 60 kilowatt hour battery for your house for $1,700. That
Yeah.
doesn't exist. So it's not bad for what it's tapping into. Whether or not it's worth it for that price, I don't know. But the Kickstarter price for the early bird special seems to be $750, which seems totally worth it to me.
Yeah.
Like if you parked your Model 3 next to your house, if your garage was attached, I think this is what you should get. Assuming it's UL certified and isn't going to burn the place
Well,
down.
which they're claiming. I looked on the page. They're claiming some sort of UL certification on it.
Well, as we might discover later on, everything claims that it's not going to catch on fire until it catches on fire.
Yeah. No, so I mean, this is kind of a cool concept, until, I mean, the only, I think, peril with this is if Tesla finds out about it and disables it through an OTA update.
Yeah, I guess the question is, can they? How can they? Can they? Can they?
Yeah.
That's the
Yeah.
question.
And the demo videos linked on it it just, showed conceptually how it works. It didn't actually show it actually working. So I don't know if they're like, oh, this is a cool idea, let's do this. But in terms of have they actually gone through the validation, tested it? I don't know.
Yeah, what strikes me as odd is nobody else has done this. And it's not like Tesla's new.
Yeah.
So this idea has been around probably since probably within a year or two of the Model S coming out, somebody has thought of this.
Hmm.
And we know people have hacked their cars to do
Hmm.
this.
Hmm.
So we know it's technically possible, but is it possible with this like simple briefcase solution?
Yeah.
And then can they brick it? Can
And
Tesla
the
brick
other thing too, and this is kind of shifting gears a little bit, but I know with like a lot of Apple accessories, a lot of third-party companies have made Apple accessories that Apple later made themselves and basically kind of made obsolete.
it? Yeah.
So that's another potential peril with this is they come out with this Tesla disables, third party, accessories through an OTA update. And then all of a sudden says, oh, look what we have. The official Tesla power exporter dingle dongle, you know, I don't know. But
Yeah.
I mean, this isn't exactly a completely new idea. I mean, Hyundai Kia did this with the EGMP cars with the little, plug-in port dongle.
Yep.
Um, now, granted that I think is only like 220 volt,
Yeah,
AC
you're not
power.
getting 3,500 watts of juice out of that thing.
Yeah. So, and I think Rivians also have exportable power, and I don't know if it's directly from like port to port or if it's through. And I know the Lightning you can charge other EVs through the 1450 outlet. I don't know if they have it enabled to, reverse flow the power through the charging port, but so this, not an entirely new idea, kind of cool. If they do it, I don't know if I'm going to be a guinea pig with this. I mean,
No, and everywhere I look, they don't seem to say what plugs are on this thing. They don't really.
mhm,
There's a lot of
unknowns.
information that we don't have. They do show that you could charge other EVs, which is kind of an handy little thing to
Hmm.
have if you're a multi-EV family and you go
Hmm.
somewhere and one car's got more charge than the other. You could just take this out of your trunk and just plug them in and spread the charge. It sounds weird. I with gas cars, I have had the I
With
have been
siphoning
in
fuel and
situations where if I could have siphoned fuel, I would have.
hmm.
So this I could totally see myself getting if I were
Yeah.
in two EV family getting into the situation where something like this would be handy, where something like this would be useful for backfeeding the power to my
Hmm.
house. Many times
Hmm.
where this would be useful for $750. I'd be right there. 1,700. I don't know. Unknown commodity for $1,700.
Yeah.
Extra
No,
don't know.
I feel within the next couple of years, exportable power. I think I mentioned this in a previous podcast, specifically in the context of like trucks. And if Ford ever does anything with like the Super Duty or the F-150, I think exportable power would be a very popular feature, very
Yeah,
useful. So I think we're going to see more of this, whether, third party kind of startups or factory integrations. So,
yeah. I think
um,
California even has a mandate on this
yeah,
about
well, I mean,
vehicle to
California likes to
something.
mandate a lot of things.
Well,
So,
let's get into that. So
uh,
there was an election a few months ago, and
yeah.
Trump won.
Hmm.
And we have talked several times about there being ramifications of that, you know?
Yes.
And here we are. Day one, instant ramifications.
Yeah.
There was a lot of going through ink
Hmm.
during inauguration, shortly
A
after
lot of
the
Sharpies.
inauguration. Yeah, a lot of Sharpies being used to write on things. So he said before he came in that he was going to rescind California's request. California. Oh no! Before he came in, we knew that he was going to tackle California's carbon emission standards and all of their
Hmm.
things, and we knew that was a given. It was something like during his first 4-year term, California spent something like $62 million in legal fees defending
Hmm.
its it defending itself against the federal government over
Hmm.
for what California would say overreaching and taking away states' rights. Uh,
Hmm.
that will be California's argument. Trump
Hmm.
will have been saying, "Well, you don't have the right to say that,"
Hmm.
whatever. But California now has a line item for something like $44 million for the next 4 years to sue the
Hmm.
federal government about having the right to set their own standards on things, one of which is emissions. Well, the first thing that California did before Trump even got inaugurated was they rescinded their own request to the EPA
Oh, the
regarding
clean trucks. Yeah.
clean trucks. So
Yeah.
we've already got consumer vehicles. That's already been approved by the EPA. There is
Hmm.
no turning that back as far as we know. But the clean trucks, larger vehicles, that
Hmm.
was still waiting pending approval from the EPA, and California has rescinded that because they were saying,
It's got a snowball's chance and
yeah,
you know
basically
where under Trump.
it's a waste of money right now, is the impression I got
Yeah.
from this. So Trump comes in and he says in his inauguration speech, EV mandates are gone. Well, got news for you, Trump. There aren't any federal EV mandates.
Yeah. It was more of like a goal.
It was a non-binding
Yeah.
thing that Biden had put out there. What it really is stricter emission standards, which we've
Hmm.
been doing since the
Hmm.
1970s. It's just
Hmm.
ratcheting up ever since, but Trump has given
Hmm.
it the name of EV mandate, so people are
Hmm.
against it, but it's not an EV mandate.
Hmm.
it's
Yeah.
it's stricter ICE emission standards with a
Hmm.
goal of 50% EV sales by no
2030. Yeah.
2030, but I thought it was actually like 2040 or 2045. It was so my memory's probably wrong. Maybe it was 2030. I don't know, but it was a goal, completely
Hmm.
non-binding, nothing. It was a promissory note or whatever you'd call it. It was a promise ring. Whatever. It doesn't actually mean anything. So, all right. So he rescinds that, which wasn't a thing to rescind to begin with. And then, according to this article on Reuters, Trump said in an executive order that he's halting distribution of unspent government funds for vehicles charging stations from the $5 billion fund. Call
Hmm.
for ending a waiver for states to adopt zero emissions vehicles rules by 2035. That's him wanting to go in and take away California's
Hmm.
state right to do that, which they do have a right. They predate the EPA. That's how come California can do it.
Yeah.
Uh, and said his administration would consider ending EV tax credits, which we knew.
Hmm.
We figured that was going to happen. What else was there? Trump said in his order on Monday he was seeking to repeal a waiver granted to California in December for the EPA. Yes, that was what we were just talking about. That states the end of gasoline sales by 2035 that 11 other states have. So he's going to
Okay.
go after something that the federal government has already approved.
So I have a lot of thoughts and opinions on this.
All right, dig in.
Okay, so he tried to do this in his first term, in terms of basically taking away California's authority to kind of set its own rules. That was not successful. Um, it's unclear whether it will. The only way I possibly see this being successful is if it goes all the way to the Supreme Court. And for some reason, the Supreme Court rules in favor of the federal government, basically preempting, California rules. Never mind
They
that the
would
historical
basically
precedent.
Yeah, the Supreme Court would basically have to turn tail completely on what they have been ruling, and they would have to say the states don't actually have independent rights.
Yeah.
And that's completely opposite of what they've been ruling. So it's
Traditional conservative kind of
but
philosophy.
tradition's out the window at this point.
Yeah, no.
What the current Supreme Court has been ruling is states' rights over federal rights. And this is Trump requesting federal rights over state rights.
Hmm.
And it completely goes against several rulings that the Supreme Court has done with these specific judges. So I think it has very little chance of passing for him to
Hmm.
remove CARB's ability to
Hmm.
to
And
set a
and not
standard.
and the other thing too is the other states, whether I think it's 11 or 14 or however many it is, that have adopted the California standards, they've adopted them voluntarily. It's not like California's gone to Colorado or New York or wherever else and said you must follow our rules. The legislatures or the regulatory bodies in those states have said we are going to adopt your rules.
And I thought that they could adopt, that they had to adopt in full, but it doesn't seem like they have to, because Oregon is backtracking on some of the things with the,
Hmm.
if we'll get into it a little bit later, the
Hmm.
RV problems that they're having with the bigger trucks and RV sales
Hmm.
and all of this. Oregon's looking, or has modified their
Hmm.
roll-in of that. So there is leeway within that. So states voluntarily step in, and then states also go, and we're
Yeah,
going to phase it
but
in
they could
over this
also
number of
voluntarily
years.
opt out or
Yeah,
say we're going to fall back to the federal standard.
yeah. So it's a states' rights issue,
Hmm.
which I think means California will likely win, but by them pulling their truck
Hmm.
EV requirements, I think they realize it's going to be expensive for them to win.
Yeah,
How far are
and
they willing to go?
they may just wait this out till 2028, and whether it's Vance or whoever, or I have my own ideas of who the Democratic candidate might be, but I'm not going to
Oh, it's
share that
way
quite yet.
early. It's way
Yeah.
early.
Um,
I wouldn't even
but
get down that road.
they may, I think probably with a lot of the environmental kind of regulatory policy, a lot of states or policymakers are just kind of going to wait it out basically because they know whatever they propose, Trump plus the Republican Congress. Now that could change midterm, and it could shift toward,
Which
more
is what happened
Democrats.
last time.
Historically, the opposition parties gain seats. But anyway, um, that they're just like, you know what, we know this is going to be a non-starter for the next 2 years at least, so we're not going to propose anything. Specifically with this truck thing, California, my understanding of it is basically it would have banned non-carb compliant trucks from out of state from coming into the state. So I actually don't completely disagree with this because this could have created a major pain in the butt for like interstate commerce and
I
um
don't know if that's true. I don't, I need to look into that, but I have heard
mhm,
that argument,
mhm,
and then I have heard them say, or heard people say, no, that's not the case. You can still drive your Arizona truck to Oregon through California. Like
mhm,
you can still do this. The Mexico trucks are still allowed into California. That
mhm.
I don't know. We don't know enough about the topic on that to know if
Yeah,
that
I
one's
don't
true or
know.
not. Because
But
I have heard that argument and I have heard the counter argument of that. And I don't think that you can stop interstate commerce with vehicles traveling through. I think that's a
yeah, I don't
whole
know.
other constitutional issue.
Yeah.
So, all
Um,
right. So what do you think? You wrote an article on this.
yeah, it's kind of
Oh,
broad, kind of
so Trump's going to
high
come in.
level.
He's already said, drill, baby, drill. He already dropped that bomb like 5 minutes into his inaugural speech. The
Well,
weird
and he
beer.
campaigned. I mean, none of this stuff is really surprising. This is all stuff he
Yeah.
campaigned on.
Yeah. But he's already said this is what we're doing. He's
Mhm,
already going to be opening up. I think they're talking about somewhere in Alaska. The conversation
mhm,
has been
mhm,
now that that oddly enough, Biden opened up a place in an area in Alaska to start drilling, and that was like
mhm.
3 years ago, and they are still going through the process of opening those things up. So Biden's already opened up
Yeah,
drilling in certain areas of Alaska, and we're 3 years later,
yeah.
and that is
And
still in the
ironically, I
process.
heard oil production reached a record high under Biden.
Yeah. No, he
So,
started when the prices started going crazy in Ukraine. He started releasing all the barrels of oil to stabilize the price. He started
mhm,
rebuilding the national reserve of oil, like all of this, everything that Trump wants to do. Most of it, I say everything and then most,
mhm,
a lot of it has been
mhm,
done because they're common sense things that we do need an oil reserve. We
mhm.
shouldn't be as dependent on
Well,
the
actually,
foreign
Biden,
countries,
what I heard is Biden kind of depleted it to try to lower prices.
which is what
Now,
always happens.
the
Yeah.
strategic reserve needs to be,
And
you
that's
know,
what, yes. So,
refilled
yes,
basically.
which is
But
what they're doing.
anyway,
It's a standard move by every president in the history of
yeah,
America. That we have a reserve, you tap into the reserve, and as soon as there's now space in the reserve for more, you add more to the reserve, and you
yeah,
do that by increasing drilling. Like it's a standard equation. It's
yeah.
nothing new. Trump has not come up with a new formula. This is, but the real question here is we're going to we're going to step back from uh, ICE emissions requirements. We're going to take a step back. And he's
Hmm.
probably going to be able to do that fairly quickly
Hmm.
and say, okay, well, we were supposed to hit, 51 miles per gallon by
Hmm.
2030 or whatever it was. Now we're not going to, I mean, Obama kept messing with those numbers
Hmm.
too. And
Hmm.
this is W before
Most
him.
likely, what it'll be is it'll be a moratorium on new regulations, basically a
Yeah.
freeze of whatever the current standards are. They'll probably just say we're going to freeze it where it is, and or we're going to really slow down the ramp up of requirements. So, by 2027, it's like maybe another 2 miles per gallon
Yeah.
improvement or whatever,
Or
uh,
maybe he's stagnant for a couple of years and Stellantis brings back the Hemi
which
and
they're talking
everybody's happy.
about
Yeah.
supposedly.
And this
Yeah.
would be a great opportunity for them. And they being the automotive industry, can produce ICE vehicles cheaper and faster than they
Hmm.
can EVs. And they don't need to worry about infrastructure, and they don't need to worry about educating people, and they don't need to worry about ad campaigns and butts in seats and all this. The Camry drives. You just go and buy a Camry. Like
Hmm.
you don't need
Hmm.
to convince anybody to buy an ICE vehicle.
Hmm.
So does this put the US behind? I think that was the gist of your article is, are we, for lack of a better word, screwed in the long term for being competitive as a global market?
I I I make the case that it is in the U.S. auto industry's strategic interest to not let up on EV R&D. Is we need to keep pressing forward because otherwise, if we just kind of retreat back and say, "Well, we're going to drive our V8s and Hemis and diesels and this and that," increasingly the U.S. is kind of becoming an island into itself, whereas we're only developing and building for ourselves and we don't really have much of an eye for exports, which I mean, to be fair, that's kind of been the case for a while, where most of the vehicles sold or most of the vehicles built in the US are sold in the US.
Yeah, we make giant vehicles here that get
Yeah.
horrible fuel economy. You're not selling
Yeah.
you're not going and taking an F-350 and selling it in Europe
Yeah.
with, a horrible fuel. You couldn't even round half of the corners there.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but I mean, if I think it's very short-sighted if we're basically saying, oh, well, we're gonna roll back and we're gonna go back to V8s and, big gas guzzling engines. There's becoming less and less of a market for those in overseas markets to the point where I don't know. I what I'm saying is I'm saying, look, if temporarily, within the next couple of years, if we want to do, if Ram wants to bring back the Hemi, if, you know, I don't know, Ford wants to, do a Coyote powered Ranger or whatever. I mean,
Oh,
fine,
that'd be awesome.
um,
Don't tease me with
yeah,
that.
you know, fine, that's fine. But keep your eye on the prize and the longer term trend, we're talking past, you know, 2028 is toward electrification still. I still believe that most of the data shows that. And if we let up from that, the Chinese they're staying on the throttle with EVs. So if we let off, that means they're going to catch up and surpasses that much quicker. Now, from a volume standpoint, I think that I don't mean to sound defeatist about this. I think the die has already been cast. I think it's pretty clear China is, from a unit volume standpoint, going to be the leader in EVs. So
They've got no option. It's a matter of
yeah.
survival over there. They may
Hmm.
want to lead the world in EVs, but the
Hmm.
reality is pollution's so bad
Hmm.
and so many people want to get cars
Hmm.
that they can't have them as
Hmm.
ICE. They have
Hmm.
to be EVs, or else they're
Yeah.
all just going to choke to death in the cities. Like,
Yeah.
it is literally survival at this point there. It's like how LA was back in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. You
Hmm.
had to make a change, or you
Hmm.
will end up with uninhabitable swaths of land
Yeah. Yeah.
where you will choke to death.
And it's that's also kind of the case in India. I think that's
Yeah.
accelerating India's plans because their air pollution is some of the worst in the world. It used to be China, now it's India. So there, I think the urgency for it in those markets is also increasing, where they're like, we really need to get serious about EVs. So, I know it's not cool and hip right now to be pro EV. It's all drill baby drill and drive your Hemi and all that. But I make the case we shouldn't let up on EV development. I think the US needs to be in the game. We need to be competitive.
Well,
We'll
and
see. We'll see if
ironically,
anyone's listening.
there'd be a lot of unemployment in red state when if they dropped all EVs, because there's a lot of manufacturing in red states that go
Hmm.
on
Hmm.
with EVs. So if they dropped those plants, there would actually be higher unemployment at this point. It's not something you want to stop.
Yeah.
You just want to, I guess, give, and I can't say I'm against this idea, give
Hmm.
some companies like Stellantis a chance,
Hmm.
because they're heading down a road where it looks shockingly like a dead end at the end of it for them.
Yeah.
And if they had a little bit more, to mix metaphors now to the dead end, if they have more runway on this dead end, I don't know. It's a
Yeah.
metaphor.
Well, I
bad
mean,
bad one.
on that point, so remember, gosh, I can't even remember when we first started talking about this, but we were talking about the Ram 1500 Rev, which was going to have this like colossal, like 3,000 plus pound, 229 kilowatt hour battery.
Yeah,
That's,
huge battery in a pickup truck.
yeah,
Yep.
that's not happening anymore.
Is it
So
not? Or they're
the,
delaying it? It'll never
no,
happen.
no, no.
It'll
So,
never happen.
let me unpack this a little
Okay.
bit. So previously there were going to be two versions of the Rev. There was going to be a shorter range. I think they said 150 kilowatt hour battery, and then
Reasonable.
the
Reasonable.
Mega 229 plus kilowatt hour, 500-mile range model. So they've decided they're going to drop the long range full EV. Instead, they're going to prioritize the Ram Charger, the plug-in hybrid EREV version. So they're going to have the smaller, shorter range Ram Rev, pure battery electric, and then the plug-in hybrid EREV, whatever you want to call it, for the Ram Charger, and just kind of set aside the long range Rev.
I'm not
Which,
opposed to that.
no,
I,
honestly, it makes sense, because the long range Rev would have been extremely expensive, possibly pushing $100,000. It would still have all the limitations of a pure battery electric while towing. Um,
well,
would have been
beyond
colossally
that,
heavy.
yeah,
Yeah.
beyond that, it's got, if you brute force something to the
Hmm.
point where you end up with a truck that can tow a whole bunch, a long distance on battery power alone. When
Hmm.
you come to recharge it, you're there, your downtime is so long. And all
Hmm.
I keep thinking of is when I go camping, I just want to get there.
Hmm.
And I don't want to stop and have to charge my truck
Hmm.
for an hour and a half
Hmm.
to refill this gargantuan battery
Hmm.
as I'm blocking all the other EV spots
Hmm.
with the trailer, or I've got to disconnect. Like, I just want to get where I'm going. I am the
Hmm.
guy that brings spare fuel cans and has 20 gallons of fuel in the back of my
Hmm.
F-250 when I'm going somewhere, because we can pull off, we can do a potty break for the kids, and I fill up the truck at the side of the road, and then I carry on, and I can get away with going hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles with one gas stop
Hmm.
because I come prepared with all this extra fuel.
Hmm.
I don't want to be sitting trying to find this charger where I've
Hmm.
got to sit for an hour and a half.
Hmm.
I would much prefer to have like a RAM charger
Hmm.
plug in where I can go little distances on EV, or
Hmm.
maybe all my local stuff, non-towing, is all EV.
Hmm.
And then when I go and I'm hauling out to the desert,
Hmm.
I'm I could do the same thing. I could take extra
Hmm.
gasoline and go, and I
Hmm.
don't have to worry about it. And it's
Hmm.
easy, it's simple, and it works.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with the strategy. I think it's rational. I mean, I appreciate the determination and kind of wanting to do something like the long range Rev, but it just really didn't make sense on a lot of levels. So anyway, that's that. Speaking of charging stations, so I'd say within the past couple of years, it's kind of become a thing of, I guess, meth heads or whoever chopping the cables and stealing them and selling the
Yes.
copper or whatever.
And
Um,
in fact, somebody that I know who works at a dealership, he's like
hmm
co-owner or something at the
hmm
dealership. They had all of their cables stolen. Their dealership butted up against a washway, and they had
hmm
all their EV charging stations like lined up against the fence. And
hmm
they came into work one day, and all of them had been snipped through the fence. They didn't even come onto the property,
Jeez.
so they took all of it. And
Yeah.
he's like, "What the heck? Like
Yeah.
hundreds of thousands of dollars thrown away." So they need a solution to this, and apparently ChargePoint
Charge point. Yep.
has has the solution, which is cut resistant cables. Hate to tell you this, you can cut anything.
Yeah. No, I mean, if you're determined enough, yeah, you can cut anything. But I guess the idea with this is make them hard enough to cut where they're not as attractive as a target, and that basically the cable thieves would, go on to easier targets.
Yeah, I had to
So,
explain this with when we go biking with my kids, and when I take them biking, and I take a little cable
hmm
lock with us, and it's got a tiny little puny lock on it, and
hmm
it's a pretty simple cable, and probably with a rock and a couple of rocks, I could probably beat the lock to pieces, and
hmm
I could
hmm
defeat this. And my kids have asked me about this, and I'm like, it's not to stop the person who actually is out to get our bikes. I'm not going to
hmm
stop them. I can't
hmm
stop them.
hmm
But what I can stop is a casual thief or somebody who is unprepared. And that
hmm
is of all the thieves out there, which there aren't many, but of the
hmm
thieves out there, most are just looking for an easy score. They're
hmm
not looking for the most difficult thing. This is why I put a lock on the door of the house. If somebody wants to get in, they break a window and they come in.
hmm
You're just
hmm
looking for the casual person
hmm
and to stop the casual thief. And that, if these are resistant enough cables to cut through, with you can't use an angle grinder really easily to get
hmm
through these things, then great. That sounds great.
Yeah.
Sounds like something they should have been doing
Yeah,
from day
and,
one.
interestingly, suppose, and I don't know how successful they're going to be at this. Supposedly, ChargePoint wants to sell the cables to other, EVC,
Hmm.
um, you know, charge station manufacturers. So, um, and I think they even said they'll basically sell you the IP like on a licensing basis. Like this is something they developed in-house, but they kind of want to share it. I mean, I'm sure, of course they want a little cut for themselves, but
Yeah.
this is like a product they would consider selling to, EVgo, you know, Blink, whoever.
I wonder if this makes the cables pretty unwieldy. If you've got a liquid cooled, uncuttable
They're
350
they're they're claiming
kilowatt cable.
they're claiming the way it's constructed that the difference in like pliability is negligible. That they're slightly stiffer, I guess, but they said it's not a huge noticeable difference. They're basically equivalent to the current cables. That they really focused on trying to keep the form factor pretty trim and anyway, got a video link, kind of cool.
Link in the show notes.
Yeah. So the RV ban.
Speaking of RVs,
So this is kind of an interesting workaround I hadn't considered, but the one beneficiary of this potentially
this is a
is
California RV. It's not a ban.
no, despite what Trump might say.
It's not a ban on California sold RVs, but it is a issue with manufacturers need to sell X number of EVs, and RV manufacturers are secondary purchasers of chassis that then get converted into RVs. And there's only Ford, I believe, that has a chassis for big RVs that can make a Class A or a C.
Yes,
Uh,
and the reason they can is because Ford also sells the Mach-E and F-150 Lightning. So I guess how this rule is currently written, that allows Ford to be able to sell their chassis to like Thor or Forest River,
yeah.
whoever. Um, and because they sell enough Mach-E's and Lightnings, it lets them sell this motorhome chassis that has the 7.3 Godzilla gas V8. Um, so I guess presumably those would be unaffected. So RVs built on that chassis, you know,
Yeah.
I guess.
And some sprinter type vehicles, because you can get uh the e-sprinter or whatever it is, they sell,
E-Transit.
yeah, they sell that style van.
Hmm.
Manufacturers sell those in electric versions, so you can get those, some of them. You can buy credits, green credits, whatever. And I
Hmm.
tried to look up how much that costs, but that's a really hard number to find
Yeah.
for what does that tack on to the price of buying that.
Hmm.
But there was an article that you linked to at theautopian.com, and I read through it. And what I got from this is it is such a convoluted, confusing rule that California's come up with for the implementation of heavy trucks, which
Hmm.
then includes RVs with
Hmm.
some carve outs for emergency vehicles and whatnot.
Hmm. Hmm.
But it's so written so poorly that at one point in there, it was like Mercedes or somebody says, we can't sell in California, so we're pulling all of our chassis out. And California said, no, no, you can sell here. And they're like, no, look at your rule. Like,
Yeah.
I can't. So the state is saying, come on and bring it. And the manufacturer is saying, look at the way you've written this. I literally can't bring this in,
Hmm.
despite what you said. Your rule
Hmm.
does not
Hmm.
agree with what you are now saying.
Yeah.
So what
California.
it
California is famous at making very obscure, hard to understand rules. Like I'll give you kind of a for instance kind of anecdotal
keep in mind,
example.
we've just at the beginning backed up California and its right to do this. And
Yes.
now
And
I see the irony.
they're making it hard on themselves. So
Yes.
case in point, this is like not an EV example, but for instance, if I wanted to, so if I wanted to do an engine swap, I have an 83 Buick Regal. I talked about it a few times here and there. Um, I've thought about doing an engine swap on it. So I I could do I could get an engine out of like an F-body Camaro or Firebird 5.7 LS1, whatever, no problem, because it's considered a light duty vehicle. Now, where you get into the gray area is so you had the 5.3 Vortec, which was they made millions of them, put them in like almost every Silverado 1500 for years,
Basically
right?
everything. They put
Yeah.
that in.
Um, so I guess my understanding is if the engine was originally out of a two-wheel drive, it would maybe be eligible, but if it's a four-wheel drive, that's a different weight class and that would not be eligible. And also too, let's say a 6 liter Vortec, which you have a vehicle that has one.
I do have that engine.
The the Yukon Denali. That so that's an even more of a gray area because that engine was offered in both 3/4 and half-ton trucks. So I don't know if they trace it all the way back to the original VIN of the vehicle, but presumably, if that engine originally came out of a 3/4 ton, that would not be allowed. But if it came out of a Yukon Denali, which is a half ton, maybe. But it would be up to the discretion of the carb ref whether or not they'd allow it. It's really so California has a history of making really obscure, arcane rules that are really hard to understand and really hard to comply with. So this is nothing new,
Yeah, and
unfortunately.
this is where we stand on this. So there's this, like I said, this long article. You can read it in the show notes, but the end of it is that the person who wrote this story said, I don't know.
Yeah.
That was kind of the conclusion. Long, long process of, wow, this is confusing. They're going to, or I guess at this point, been to the Florida RV show, and we're going to continue these conversations with the manufacturers. We still don't, here we are in 2025. We still don't know if you can sell gas and diesel powered uh, RVs
Motorhomes, yeah,
with a 8500 GVWR um,
in California.
in California, and consequently
A lot of
Oregon
companies have said,
and
screw
some
it, we're
others.
not even going to.
Yeah, until they can figure it out, we're out.
Yeah.
And it's interesting.
Yeah.
It's
Good job, California.
yeah, well, both meant uh, in a good way and a bad way, depending on what you're talking about, because some things are done well and some things are not. This one was not done particularly well.
Yeah.
Other things are done particularly well. So it's a mixed bag. What was not done really well was keeping an eye on how the books were looking at Canoo.
Yes.
So I've been saying for how long that Canoo is dead.
Yes.
I think
Now it's official.
I probably called it midway through last year. Probably said the
Yeah.
writing's on the wall. That
Even
there's
though they
there,
were like, we got to deal with
yeah,
Walmart. We got to deal with NASA.
yeah, and
Yay.
you keep looking at the cash on hand. You keep looking at the actual deals that they've signed. Like they sold like 10,000 units to of these Canoo minivans to Walmart, but there was no commitment to it.
Sold.
Yeah, quote unquote. There
Yeah.
was no commitment. So you looked at everything that they did. There was no there was no there. And everything that they did showed that they were one step away from bankruptcy. Well, now they're in bankruptcy.
In chapter
Ceased
7, I might
operations.
add. Not chapter 11 would be like, we will rebuild. Chapter 7 is we're turning off the lights, shutting the doors. We're done.
Yeah.
So
So, did you realize that one of the first articles that was written for the walkcar.com was you doing a comparison between the ID Buzz, which you said at the time was probably going to be called the ID 7, and the
which ended
Canoo?
up being a big sedan, but who knows?
Yes.
I don't know.
And I looked at that and reread the article earlier today.
Hmm.
And even there, like I like the way that the Canoo looks, but you just look at like the driving position, you look at everything, it was just so much against it.
Yeah. Well,
And
yeah.
they never I talked a little bit about this last week, I think, about
Hmm.
Aptera.
Hmm.
And the reason that they're in business is probably because they never entered production. I think Canoo tried to enter production, and that was the end. I think they could keep going
Yeah.
almost indefinitely without producing anything. And now they
Yeah.
tried to produce some. They tried to get some out. NASA had a couple. U.S. Postal Service has a few. The military has a few. And I think it just killed them as they're
Yeah.
trying to ramp up. They got a facility.
So
They
basically, they didn't make it through production hell.
yeah, they couldn't get through the first steps because it's just ridiculously expensive. I mean, it nearly killed
Yeah.
Tesla with the
Yeah.
Model 3.
Yep.
You know, you produce something low volume like the Model S and you kind of get away with it if you got enough
Hmm.
money or you got a rich enough backer.
Hmm.
But as soon as they went into the Model 3, like they were just trying to ramp it up and it was like it
Hmm.
was day to day Tesla was on life support
Yeah.
at the
Yeah.
time. Who would have thought they'd make it through and become the richest company in the world, or
Yeah.
richest automotive manufacturer in the
We
world?
we didn't have this in the rundown, but I guess they just for 2024 they just surpassed Audi um in terms of like overall unit volume, which I guess was I personally I kind of thought they did that a while ago, but I guess I don't know, that's
Yeah,
pretty significant. I don't know.
it's another thing of how do you slice it and yada yada yada. But I mean, they're on a great trajectory for sales.
Yeah. I mean, I guess, if you want to call premium brands, I mean Tesla's like in the top 4.
That's where it's always been with
Yeah.
the how you slice it is that they were like number one premium brand a couple years ago, or a year or two ago, whatever it was, outselling BMW and Mercedes. And it's like, yeah, but um, have you driven a BMW or Mercedes?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
they're premium by price, not premium by build quality.
Yeah.
And
But they have
uh,
other factors that kind of,
yes, and there's all of that. But we've had this conversation so many
yeah.
times. Let's move on.
Anyway,
We quickly, what have we got left over here? GM's
GMFTC, I don't really have anything to say on
This
this
is a
unless you
huge
want to comment.
conversation. GM settled a case with the FTC on selling data. So all the data that they track you with, that all the manufacturers do
Hmm.
on new vehicles, GM, I guess, has been selling data that they're not supposed to sell
To third parties.
to
Yeah.
third parties, and they got caught. They settled with FTC, and FTC has now banned them from selling data to third party makers for 20 years. And from my understanding of this, they've banned them from collecting data for the next 5.
Oops.
Yeah, and GM's not doing so hot in the EV world per se,
Hmm.
even though I see tons of Hummers now,
Hmm.
and Lyrics are
Hmm.
everywhere, but
Hmm.
they're still way out there compared to Tesla. They're not, they're
Hmm.
barely on the
Hmm.
radar. Data is what it's all about. And so this is a conversation that we can kind of end it here, because this is something that will not come and haunt GM now or in 2 years or in 5 years, but in 10 years they could be so far behind because of this deal that this could be the first arrow that hit them.
Yeah.
Is this
the longer term ramifications of this are kind of unclear, but it could, to your point, it could be pretty significant. So
yeah. All right. Do you want to talk about anything else? Pick one item.
Okay. The Juniper came out, the long awaited Model Y refresh.
Yes.
You like it? I'm meh.
It gives it a unibrow. It makes it more look like the Highland Model 3.
Yeah,
a
with the
bit.
little dash of Cybertruck, whether that's good or bad.
Yeah.
And it's got a kind of
like
an interesting rear tail light. It's got like a one piece like tail light that goes across the back, and I don't know.
I think it's something we're going to see more of as Tesla sales struggle a little bit, which they have been. One of the things that is an old automotive manufacturer trick is every 4 years refresh, every 8 years new car. And part of that is it's like Apple. They didn't just come out.
Yeah.
Well, it's got to look different. It's got to make you want to buy the next car. So you've always said, well, you get, as we were just about to go down the road and I just cut us off of, well, the Model 3 isn't exactly premium when you look at the interior, or necessarily the build quality is debatable, whatever, but they're constantly getting you upgrades. You can constantly get software updates. You constantly get these additional benefits that come from that. That's part of the problem.
But they're not really tangible.
You took your car in and they got $3,000 off of you or whatever it was for your hardware 3 update, but it didn't sell them a $50,000 car. So because they allowed that update, they lost out potentially on they got a $3,000 sale. They didn't get a $50,000 sale. And other manufacturers have figured out if you want to stay in business, you update on this regular 4 to 8 year cycle. And that's when you get people. Apple didn't just release the iPhone and then not release another one. Every year there's another one. Every year there's another one. Every year they want you to buy the next one. They don't let you upgrade. They glue the whole thing together. They make it impossible to do the upgrades because that's how you make your money. So I think we're going to start seeing more updates of existing Teslas, especially their high production ones, the Model 3, the Model Y. And if they do come out with the mythical $25,000 car, that you will start seeing more regular updates than what they've been doing. Just so, and maybe not even allowing the back dates, just so then you force people into wanting to buy the next vehicle.
Well, I mean, they've kind of done that somewhat. I mean, not to get too down the rabbit hole, but like, there are certain games I can't install on mine because the newer models, because priorities, right?
I hope nobody is buying a $50,000 car to get a video game.
No, but the newer models have the AMD Ryzen processor, and mine has an Intel Atom. So I'm somewhat limited on my gaming capabilities. Not that was necessarily the reason I bought it in the first place, but to your point, yeah, I mean, it does. At a certain point, it just doesn't make sense to keep making stuff backwards compatible.
I think if all of a sudden the next Model 3 came out and it had a Model S dash in it, so it had a gauge cluster in front of you. If it suddenly came out and it had something else in the back, like screens in the back, headrests, I don't even know if they do that. I don't think they do they?
No, they just have
the center one in the middle. Yeah. So if all of a sudden they do, like the next Model 3 has a gauge pod in front of the driver as well as a center, and then different screens in the back, that might be an incentive to purchase the next model. And the exterior looked a little different, so people knew that you had purchased the new Model 3 instead of buying a 5-year-old used one.
Well, but I don't even know if my next car is going to be a Tesla.
Hopefully
it might
not.
be a Rivian R3.
Yes.
Possibly. You know who else is a fan?
Who's that?
Mate Rimatz.
Oh, yeah!
He quote said, "I would buy one in a heartbeat."
Well, yeah, because he's rich enough to.
Well, yeah. But anyway, he's a fan too, so I'm in good company, I guess.
Hopefully he's a fan of the Watt Car and a fan of the wattcar.com/store, where he should go.
And he would buy a hat and a t-shirt in a heartbeat?
He should buy a hat and a t-shirt in a heartbeat. In fact, he should buy, I don't know, 100 hats and t-shirts in a heartbeat.
Give them out to all of his staff.
Yeah, I highly recommend that. Everything we talked about will be embedded into the show notes of this podcast. There is, what else is there to know? There is, I already said go to the store, find us on social media. I thought about closing our X account today. Didn't do it, but I'm thinking of it.
We're gonna go to Blue Sky.
I'm considering. I don't know. I can't decide if we are spread too thin and we're not, we need to concentrate on one or two things, do less, but do it better. Or whatever. Email us at hello@thewalker.com and let me know what do you think we should do. And then thewalker.com/advertise that Mate Rimats needs to come on here.
Yeah,
And
not Canoo.
Not Canoo.
Sorry, that
Although
invitation has been rescinded.
They have money in the bank still. We'll take that money in the bank.
All right.
We'll be back in a week. I'm sure something else will happen between now and then. I hope nothing additional happens as far as laws go.
Oh, I'm sure there will be some changes.
Let's let that ride for a while, and instead let's talk about other exciting EVs that are coming this way. Talk to you in a week.
See ya.